So let's get to, now this is part 2 here on discourse analysis. Let's get to the reality of performing discourse analysis. I'm going to present a scenario, and I want you to tell me what you would look for, what you would examine or analyze as a researcher in the following situation. Here's the scenario. We're in a 5th grade classroom, and 5 children are sitting at a round table discussing a book they just read. Got that? Little book talk discussion going on. 5th grade classroom, 5 children sitting around a table. Little book talk discussion going on. What would you look at? What would you look for? What would you examine? What would you see? If you happen to be wondering at this point, there are an awful lot of possibilities here, you have now entered the worlds, and I say plural, worlds of discourse analysis. Furthermore, if you're saying to me, hold on, Scouty 111, you need to give me an outcome. This is a research study. What effect am I looking for? In that case, I'd say to you, what theoretical lens, which is another way of saying from which context, would you like to use to view this discussion group? Let's look at just a few possibilities of how a researcher using discourse analysis might view this discussion. Shall we look at the discussion group through a content of talk context or lens? Content of talk in a social setting is classically done in discourse analysis. You look at the content of the talk. Does that seem important to you, or does it not? If content of talk seems important to you, if that's a lens you'd like to use, tell me, shall we look at it in terms of what lens shall we view this content of talk? What lens? Shall we examine children's content of talk in terms of their quality of contributions? Their quantity of talk? Perhaps, should we look at gender differences? Let's look at the notion of quality of contributions. What does quality mean? What are quality contributions? If the children tend to talk about their personal lives only remotely related to the book, are these contributions worthwhile? Some of you are perhaps answering yes, some perhaps answering no. Shall we use the context of examining gender differences in students' content of talk? In what way shall we define those differences? That is, what context shall we use to define difference versus similarity? Could those contexts change? Where we once saw similarities, could we now see differences, and vice versa? Shall we examine the quantity of talk? Shall we use that lens, that context? What is too much talk? What's too little? If a child is silent in this book talk discussion group, is that a bad thing? And we notice that little Billy is doing what we call hogging the discussion. Oh, power relationships and that effect on talk. How about that context, that lens? And wait a minute, I just noticed that what Carrie said seemed to cause David to change his mind about that point. Shall we look at the content of talk in terms of the context of cognitive change as influenced by peers? Well, hold on, wait a minute. There's also a book that the children are supposed to be talking about. Could the book be making a difference in the children's quality and quantity of talk? Could the book itself have some sense of quality, lack of quality? Will you as the researcher read the book? What's the book's meaning to you? Should the content of the children's discussion reflect your meanings? Oh, and hold on. These children are sitting in a particular classroom with a particular teacher. Could the room be making a difference in children's discourse? In our view, is the room dilapidated, or is it bright and shining and beautiful? Shall we examine discourse as a function of, say, economic condition? Excuse me. Oh, and that teacher, what are her discourse patterns like with the children? Does she encourage the children to talk every day, or does she like a quiet classroom? Have the children received a not-so-subtle message that talking is not a good thing, thereby influencing the quality and quantity of their talk in this book talk discussion? Is there a power relationship going on there between the teacher and the children that needs to be examined? Shall we use that lens? Hold on, wait a minute. Is power always a bad thing? Can power be used in a positive way? Shall we use that lens? You know, I don't like how these kids are talking to one another. They're interrupting each other a lot, talking over one another. Where did they learn that? From home? Shall we examine the children's talk as a function of the discourse patterns of their home? Or how about their community? Because a home's in a community. The classroom's in a school, which is, related to home and community, right? Maybe this kind of talk is normal for them. Maybe they aren't consciously being what I view as rude. And these children, most of them speak English as his first language, I notice. But I do notice that this little Latino fella is talking a lot, and the Asian girl seems awfully quiet, and that little George from Texas seems to be saying an awful lot, but he isn't saying much at all. To what degree is children's talk influenced by broader cultural conditioning? Listeners, I think you're getting the idea here. I could go on and on and on ad infinitum. Each one of the descriptions I've provided can be placed under particular theory, a particular lens, a particular context that we use to perform discourse analysis. Sure, and this is important here. When we perform discourse analysis, we look around the text, whether the text is talk, speech, or writing, however you want to define discourse. We look around that text in our analysis, but we use language that is context with which to view or see the context surrounding the talk and the actual talk itself. I mean, the talk is not isolated, right? There's the context. But we use lenses, context, in order to view this. That is, the lenses themselves with which discourse analysis is performed. They are contexts. I'll try to explain it this way. Put it like this. Think of discourse, the word discourse. The word and meaning of discourse is context and context dependent. Analysis. The word and meaning of analysis is context and context dependent. Discourse analysis. The word and the phrase and meaning of discourse analysis is context and context dependent. Lens, the meaning of lens, is context and context dependent. Critical theory is context and context dependent. Sociocognitive theory is context dependent. Do you get the idea? It's not the case that meaning is context, is about discourse analysis, nor is it the case that meaning is context, is synonymous with discourse analysis. Sure, discourse analysis uses context, but as I have shown, discourse analysis is itself and in every way context. Well, we'll see how that goes. Talk to you later, fellow discourse analyzers.